I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step. Why not now start a family is one of the biggest why not nows we'll ever go through. And if you're like me and you're currently in the middle of this process, and or maybe you're just trying to make the decision, should we start now? Should we wait? This episode can provide some powerful information for you. Personally, this isn't something I've ever talked about publicly, but after my fertility journey and experience over the past few years, and also listening to many others, like my friend Gustafson, who's on the show today, I thought it would be helpful for us to take a critical look at the topic of fertility and the current state of the industry, the science and research that has been done and hasn't been done, and also the powerful and sometimes misleading conversation around fertility. I've had 2 miscarriages, and as I approach 39 years old, as you can imagine, I am learning and studying and doing as much as I can right now to understand more of what my future holds. Ellen, who you will hear from, has an unprecedented story. Her experience over the course of 4+ years is unbelievable. It's so hard to believe. In fact, at times I feel like it's a movie script. One of my biggest takeaways is that Ellen realized her doctors simply didn't know enough. So she and her mom decided to take things into their own hands. Her mom even started to write handwritten letters to any doctor she could find. They started to uncover answers that some of the best fertility doctors in the world haven't been able to find. And although my situation is much more common than what Ellen has gone through, if you were to go online right now and start Googling certain situations relative to fertility, common situations, you will find mixed answers. You will find mixed signals from credible sources who have done scientific research. And so that's why I feel that this conversation is so important, and for us to have these conversations. Also, there's another obvious factor at play, and that is women in their careers and deciding when should we start trying to have a child. There was a recent New York Times article that came out and shared a study, and it found that when women have their first child between the age of 25 and 35, their pay never recovers relative to that of their spouse. Yet when women have their first baby either before 25 or after 35, before their careers get started or once they're established, eventually they close the pay gap with their husbands. Obviously, we're in our prime career building years between age 25 to 35, but that's also the time when most women want to have children or are told they should have children. So we can see how this becomes confusing and conflicting. I know in my case, the echo chamber of, you've got plenty of time, was what I was hearing. And things like, Janet Jackson just had a baby at 50. You've got plenty of time. But just because technology and innovation is advancing so quickly and we're seeing that people are getting married later doesn't mean evolution has advanced so quickly. So there are a lot of questions and a lot of conversations that aren't necessarily being had. And this is an opportunity for us today to start diving in. It's not that we have solutions and answers to everything, by no means, but there are some key things, especially with what Ellen went through and her desire to learn more, that we can learn from. For me, this episode is another Why Not Now, and that's why not now open up a little more and share a glimpse into areas of my life that I haven't shared before. And I asked myself, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I couldn't come up with a strong enough answer to not share, because I know that if this episode helps one person or couple, then it's worth it. So a little bit about Ellen Gustafson before we hop in. She is a social entrepreneur. She's the co-founder of Feed and Food Tank. She is the co-director of the Summit Institute. She's a great friend of mine, and she's one of the smartest people I know. Oh, and she's also an author. Her book is called We the Eaters, so you can check that out as well. We tackle the most taboo topics on the Why Not Now show. Oftentimes, you're hearing guests share things they've never shared before. In the spirit of things we don't typically talk about, you should know that the Why Not Now show is supported by Poo-Pourri. Yep, the original before you go toilet spray. It's magic. My friends at Poo-Pourri have literally taken the smell out of you know what. This pure blend of essential oils stops bathroom odor before it begins. Visit poopourri.com, and Why Not Now listeners get 20% off with code Why Not Now? That's all one word. Also, you can now get Poo-Pourri at Bed Bath & Beyond. We all seem to know someone who's about to have a baby. And the question is, what do we get them as a gift? Do we really go to that registry and scroll through those sometimes boring items? Or do we wow them with something different and unique? I have a solution for you. It's called Baby Beats. Baby Beats are one-of-a-kind songs created using the recorded heartbeat of the baby in utero. The song is coupled with a video that includes photos of the expecting parents and their journey to parenthood, and then it's delivered to you in a cute little wooden box with a USB drive inside. It's adorable. Baby Beats are a great solution for baby shower gifts, or even for announcement videos for the expecting parents themselves. They can share these on social media, and it's really unique. If you are interested in Baby Beats, head to yourbabybeats.com and you get a 25% discount as a Why Not Now listener. So at checkout, enter in Why Not Now as your coupon code, Why Not Now, no caps, and you get 25% off. Head to yourbabybeats.com. Ellen, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, it's so good to hear your voice, and hopefully we can catch up as we are recording and navigating through this episode. Let's hop right in. Can you tell me about a time when you had to ask yourself, why not now?
Yes, my why not now moment has changed fairly dramatically in the past year as I've had a child. My daughter was born in June of 2017, and she was what people would call a miracle of science and hope, and a lot of other things. And the process that I went through to eventually have my baby involved a lot of discovery and a lot of both scientific discovery, but also my own discovery of kind of the reality of the fertility industry and what women in their later 30s are dealing with, which is many women in my cohort of friends. And the why not now that I'm sort of answering as we speak is that I want to write, and I'm going to write a book about this experience, because I think there is a real need to have a deep and critical look at the current state of the fertility industry, and at also what women and men and families are being told about, about having children and having careers and balancing those things. And I think, I'm not saying critical, just saying that everything's bad. I'm saying critical that I think there needs to be a bit of a microscope and spotlight taken to this industry. And I realize, and my answer to why not now is why I'm the one that should to be telling this story because I've been through so much, and I'm very willing to share. So why not share now?
I'm so glad that you're writing this book. I remember we lived so close to one another when I lived in San Diego on the boat. And just for listeners, Ellen would paddleboard over to the boat and we would have, our chats.
The best meeting transportation ever.
Absolutely. And we'd go on walks. And this was before your baby girl arrived. And this was actually in the thick of what you were going through. And you educated yourself to such an extent, and you were kind of bullish about it in a good way, that you have become a voice of authority, in my opinion. Having gone through my own fertility journey and having had a couple of miscarriages, I would lean on you for insight just as much as I would go online and research, as well as talking to my doctors, because you've talked to so many scientists, and you had such an interesting and quite an anomaly experience, right? So
absolutely.
Can you share a little bit about what that was, just to give context? And then let's also talk about your opinions and thoughts on the state of the union, because I've got a lot of thoughts on that too.
Yeah. So my story is crazy. And as one doctor I went to see before I even tried to get pregnant said, which of course I never saw this doctor again, but she said, wow, this girl has a really weird story, which is not, of course, a very professional way to handle it if you're a doctor, although it is true. So we had in my family for 5 generations a mysterious issue that would cause male babies around 5 or 6 months pregnancy to just spontaneously die. So it would be, fetal death, a stillborn or a late-term miscarriage, whatever you want to call it. And the, doctors in looking at these fetuses that had died had no idea why they were dying. And so as painful as this truth is, my mom had 4 of these stillborns, and I am an only child as a female. And then my grandmother had 2, and she had 5 daughters. And when I was, in my 20s even, I used to ask doctors, had you ever heard of anything like this? I mean, every time I'd go to a new gynecologist or anyone I would meet in my world, I would ask about this unexplained male fetal death. And of course, no one would have any idea. Some answers would say, maybe you needed to take a baby aspirin every day in your pregnancy because your body rejected the fetus, or there was a million reasons, but none actually ever seemed like it was the answer. So before I started to try to get pregnant, knowing that this was my history, I went to some genetic counselors to try and do a full genetic workup on me to see, okay, is there anything now that you could find? This was in 2014. Is there anything now that we could find that would explain, why these babies were dying? Am I carrying a disease? Do I have? And of course, there was a million options, and all of them were ruled out because I didn't have any of them. And so the only medical advice in 2014, when my husband and I wanted to start a family, was just go try to have a baby. And so I was 33, about to be 34. And the first month that we set out to try to have a baby, we got pregnant. And I will admit that we did try to use some sort of old wives methods of preferencing a girl. Although it turns out we didn't really do that right. So that remains to be seen if we, but
that's another book.
Oh, that's another book. Well, that's going to be in this book, because timing and eating a certain diet that was more acidic and all kinds of stuff. But so we ended up getting pregnant, and we did the early genetic test screen. It's a test now that you can do using your blood, which of course has blood from your pregnancy. And in just pulling out your blood, they can tell if the baby is a boy or a girl, and some basic chromosomal information. And so, of course, as the world would have it, our first pregnancy was a male. And, knowing that the day that I found out that we were having a boy, I cried all night. I was, my parents cried. I mean, it was, we knew that it wasn't going to work out. And of course, my husband, not only an optimist, but also not having lived with this, genetic mystery in his life, was incredibly optimistic. And so were my doctors. My gynecologist, OBGYNs were incredibly optimistic. And, well, we don't know. And your pregnancy seems fine and everything's healthy. And my mom just kept saying, yeah, well, that was the case for me too. And so as it happened, when I entered the second trimester of that pregnancy, I started to get weekly ultrasounds because I was very nervous that something would go wrong. And, true to form, actually at the high level ultrasound around 21, 22 weeks, I found out that the baby had died. And again, no explanation, no cause of death. That I was looking in the high level ultrasound and everything, was fully normally formed. It's just that the heart wasn't beating anymore. And of course, this is a common thing for women who have any kind of pregnancy loss. The answer is we don't know why the baby died. And that's sort of, I'll stop there initially because that's one of the first issues I want to take on in this book. Why are women, when the numbers, first of all, the numbers are not clear. It's either 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 pregnancies ends in miscarriage at all different stages of pregnancy. And right now, the vast majority of women, 80 to 90% of women, have no idea why the pregnancy ended. To me, that's insane. When you have all the medical technology that we have, why are women and these pregnancies just being, tossed aside, literally thrown in the trash and said, well, we have no idea, try again next time. So that's kind of the beginning of my journey, which sets me off.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that too, we accept that that's the answer from the physicians, from the powers that be, because they are the ones that, quote, know everything, right? So even if you go online and start researching things, and we'll get into this later on down the road, but it becomes kind of part of our culture to just accept that. And we all know this is a very common thing, like in my case. I just kind of, of course it's heartbreaking, but it's also it's brushed over because it's
exactly,
just, and so then that's all we know, really. I think it's for women who have had kind of your pretty normal situation of having miscarriages all the way to you, and your situation was so uncommon, and there's so much to be learned. It's still, as extreme as those two examples are, the answer is we don't know.
Exactly. So I was, in the hospital. I tried to give birth to the fetus because I thought, well, if I can get this body out whole, then at least we can do some real research, and maybe in 2014 we have more tools than existed in my mom's day in the 80s when she was having these stillborns. And as it happened, I couldn't deliver the baby because my body didn't actually know the baby was dead yet. The doctors were saying that my body still thought I was pregnant. That it takes a little while to kind of have your body naturally figure that out. So I had sort of surgery, and at the end of the whole process, the answer to a situation like that where we don't know why, but it seems like boys die in utero in my female maternal lineage. The answer is go have IVF and test out to see if the embryo is a girl before you put it in. And of course, that's not actually solving the problem. That's right. Avoiding the problem. But at the time when I was incredibly, devastated and also desperate to have a child because I thought I was having a child, I did it, and I started the process of IVF. And this is where the book and my personal story gets very, very interesting, and much more relevant to many, many other women and families. When I started IVF, I was just 34 and had just had a pregnancy. So I thought I am a very straightforward and quite easy IVF case because I had the first month I tried naturally had a pregnancy that otherwise was totally normal and healthy. And so I thought, if you have all this science to deal with people who are having trouble getting pregnant, oh my goodness, it should work very easily on me, on my body. The real shock was that it didn't. And so I started IVF at 34. I did 2 cycles within months of having lost my first pregnancy, and both cycles failed. One failed because I had a massive cyst that no one told me was was a possibility, and it was because I got overstimulated. And the second failed because I was probably understimulated. But in IVF form, I have found with many doctors, when you are, probably given a cocktail of drugs that just didn't work on your body, instead of being told, "Hey, we doctors, there's many cocktails here, and we doctors chose one that just didn't work that well on you." Instead of being told that, you're basically told, "Oh, you must be infertile. It's your body." And I was told that about a year after I had gotten pregnant for the first time, that, "Oh, you're really having fertility issues because IVF isn't working on your body, and your egg count is very low, and your body seems to be, in serious decline." I mean, these are things I was told actually by a woman doctor who was around my age. And of course, at the time I believed it. And I thought, oh my God, my one shot of having a baby ended in stillbirth, and I'm never going to get pregnant again. And I'm having a failed cycle. So, but of course, there was a piece of me, there was a logical piece of me that was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I just had a natural pregnancy. So I decided to take a break from IVF. And on that break from IVF, I actually had what's called a chemical pregnancy. So a lot of women have this where you're trying to get pregnant, your period is delayed, you feel weird and potentially like you're starting to, be pregnant, and then your period comes late and it's kind of funky. And having been pregnant before, I knew what my body felt like. And so I had one of those where, I was really kind of sick and then got a late period, and that sort of reminded me, well, gosh, I don't want to do this again if I don't know that it's going to be a girl. It kind of instilled the fear in me of having a pregnancy and again having to find out it was a boy and then make a decision, quite honestly, because in my case, if it was a boy, I would have chosen to have an abortion, because I know what a late term pregnancy loss is like, and that's horrible. And so, I mean, really complicated stuff, right? Just for one person.
And just to real quick hop in here, I remember us talking this through at great length, and we'd go on these long walks, and it was almost like you felt, here you don't have any medical background per se. Well, I mean, like the physicians that you were working with do.
Right.
Yet at the same time, we honestly felt like we needed our 2 brains on this, because there was such a lack of answers that you and I were trying to figure this out as your options were being presented to you. It's like, wait, isn't there another option? Isn't there X, Y, and Z? And so it once again shows we're not the experts, yet at the same time, I have so much respect for how much you decided to take matters into your own hands and start researching. And it was almost like your fuel. This adversity just...
It really was. Yeah.
Pushed you forward.
And what was really fuel to me, and I think which is what a lot of other women in this circumstance lack, just because of circumstance. But I had been pregnant and it was easy. Like I got pregnant very easily, and I had a healthy pregnancy, otherwise healthy pregnancy. And so these doctors telling me that I was infertile and having these other, negative experiences with it, although are so devastating as a woman, the other side of it is there was this little kernel and this little light in the back of my head that said all the time, maybe the doctors are wrong, because I know I had this pregnancy. So my husband and I thought about doing some there's these like sperm spinning that can try to preference female, and you could do intrauterine insemination where they spin the sperm and then they inject it into you, which is a sort of a simpler form of reproductive treatment. And actually, we actually got down the path of almost doing that. And the month I went in to try to do the intrauterine insemination, I didn't ovulate that month, or I ovulated at a weird time, and it wasn't showing up in the ultrasound. And so again, I had this other hit that was like, oh my God, my fertility is dramatically declining. At this point, I'm 35, and so I'm at that scary age that all women are scared by. And so doctors are starting to treat me. Okay, now you're getting into the geriatric pregnancy category, as they actually can medically call it. And I was scared myself. My 35th birthday, a friend told me that she was pregnant, and oh God, it was devastating. I went home and cried, and I decided to go back to IVF. And I said, look, I don't want to have a natural pregnancy that I have to choose to end, and I don't have confidence that I'll ever get pregnant again on my own. So I went back to a new doctor, and I really, really, really loved this doctor and his approach. And he did a few things that I think are important for people to know. Number one, he put me on a very intensive supplement regimen. And when I started researching about these supplements, I found, my God, there's a lot of compelling evidence to suggest that these supplements are really important for women that are in their 30s to make sure that they're, doing everything they can to be fertile. Things like CoQ10, and actually high levels of vitamin C, and, a number of other, just like basic supplements I started taking. And so that made me hopeful, because I thought, well, gosh, this is different now. Right. And he also put me on a completely different IVF regimen. And that was another lesson for me. Oh, there are like hundreds of different chemical combinations that you can give a woman to stimulate ovulation and to sort of, get the eggs out at peak time. And that was another lesson to me. Well, why didn't I know that? Why? I thought I was given the IVF regimen. I didn't know that there were a million other IVF regimens that might work. So to go quickly over this next sort of part of my life, I ended up doing this first IVF cycle with the new doctor, and I got great 14 eggs, 3 perfectly healthy embryos that were all boys. And so talk about another crushing blow. Here I was, all I was trying to do was get girls. I had 3 perfect embryos and I couldn't use them because I wasn't about to implant boys again without knowing the cause. I did that was my third IVF cycle. I did a 4th cycle. I got a girl and a boy. I tried to implant that girl alone. It didn't take. I then did a 5th IVF cycle, and I got 1 more girl. And I saved that girl with the 4 boys I had, because I thought, well, look, here I am, having had a failed implantation. I'm not going to do that again. I did a 6th IVF cycle, and I got nothing. I was really stressed out at that time. I, had a lot of stuff going on. And my doctor actually told me to cancel the cycle because he said, you're just too stressed. I think this is not going to go well. And of course it didn't go well, but I pushed through anyway, because being the type A crazy person, I was like, I just need another girl. So I ended 6 IVF cycles at 36 with 5 embryos, 4 boys and 1 girl. And concurrently with that, another why not now was that when I went back to IVF, I said to my mom, look, I would love to understand the cause of this genetic issue, but I can't do that at the same time as I'm doing IVF. And so I need you to essentially take over the research part of my quest and figure out why this happens in our family. And my mom, another why not nower, literally sent hand letters to every doctor she'd ever seen when she was going through her stillborns in the 80s, handwritten letters, because she just had their addresses, they didn't have email addresses then. And one of the doctors wrote back, and she was now a Jewish chaplain down in North Carolina, and had been a top researcher in causes of fetal death and miscarriage. And she remembered my mom because my mom had 4 stillborns. So a pretty memorable case, right? And she got back involved. And this doctor, Dr. Couchok is her name, ended up getting us to a doctor at the Mayo Clinic who was very interested in our case and who was studying rare causes of sudden death, which is a perfectly good description of our case. And while concurrently I was doing these other 4 IVF cycles, the last 4 of my 6, my mom and Dr. Couchok and a Dr. Tester at the Mayo Clinic were deep in the genetic game of studying my family and understanding what was wrong. The one theory had been that on the X chromosome, of which women have 2 and men have 1, there was some disorder that if as a girl you had another X from your father, you didn't have the disorder, you just carried it. And as a boy, if you got that X from your mother, then you would have the disorder. And that theory turned out to be exactly right. So in the midst of my IVF and actually right around the time of my last failed cycle, we found out that we made the gene discovery. And it's a rare issue called IPEX syndrome. It's an autoimmune disorder. Some baby boys have it and are born and only live years. Some actually have it and have survived into early youth. And there's some kids that are living with it right now. And there were 2 other cases. Sorry, we were the third cases of this disorder, IPEX, that were publicly known. And so we being the third family that are carriers and have IPEX syndrome, we then were published in some medical journals because now they can say that as us being the third case, this is really a thing that's a pretty potentially widespread issue that causes male fetal death in families. So we make this discovery. We have these embryos from all my IVF rounds on ice, as it were. And then we start the process of, can we test the male embryos that we have and see if any of them don't have IPEX? And so, again, in the midst of these cycles that are essentially failing, we have a little ray of hope. The other side of the ray of hope is that as we've gotten to the close of our 6th cycle, that's a complete failure. I'm again faced with the very real medical diagnosis of infertility because I have had 6 IVF cycles and never gotten pregnant. Now, of course, part of it is because I did put in the boys,
right?
And if I would have gotten pregnant if I put in the boys, but they probably wouldn't have survived, right? So here's a person who had a natural pregnancy at 33. Between 34 and 36, I have 6 IVF cycles, and I've never gotten pregnant. It's pretty problematic that my body is not producing a ton of eggs, during these cycles. That would suggest that I have declining fertility. What's interesting is that I'd gotten a test right before I started my first cycle, which was, again, right after I'd had a stillborn, so a natural pregnancy and a stillborn. And when I did the FSH test then, my number was bad. Like, it suggested that I really was declining fertility. When I went to the new doctor, and this now was a year later, after a couple failed cycles, I did that same test again, and my number was perfectly fine and normal. Remember, I have all these failures, but I have all this weird data. And the fact that this is a number that people use to define someone's basic fertility, and mine was dramatically different in the opposite direction. So as I got older, somehow the number got better. Kind of suggests to me that maybe those numbers are not that good, and that we're testing women with tests that we actually don't have a lot of good data on, and maybe are not good numbers. So I end the cycles. I'm not pregnant. I have 5 embryos on ice, and we're waiting to hear what the results are. If any of the 4 males that we have don't have the genetic disorder. And so my husband and I end up going on a trip, and we had not in the whole time since our first pregnancy, we had not like even tried to get pregnant, because you can't, when you're doing IVF, you can't really get naturally pregnant because you're taking the pill and then your eggs are taken out. And at this point, I fully believed that I was infertile anyway because IVF wasn't working. But all I was doing was now waiting to find out the results. If any of the males were okay, I would have a shot. I'd put a male and a female in because I had the one girl, and I'd have a shot of getting pregnant. And I believed at this time this was my only shot. That was it. That was the only kids I was ever going to have. So my husband and I take a vacation, and on our vacation we learn that of the four males, three of them are totally fine and don't have the IPEX syndrome. And this is like a major genetic discovery and then a major dose of positive information, because this means we have three males and one female that are totally fine. And that, if you're doing IVF as a couple without this genetic disorder and you have four healthy embryos, you are game on, because you're going to do two the first shot and two the second shot, and you have a very good chance of getting pregnant. The numbers are, if you put two in, the numbers suggest that you have about an 80% chance of getting pregnant with one. And you have a 40% chance of getting pregnant with twins. And maybe those numbers are high, but for someone like me, I'm going to take it, because I was still relatively young. So I'm 36. I've got four good embryos. And my husband and I are on this vacation, and my doctor says, hey, when you get your next period, come back in to see me, and we'll start planning the implantation. He's like, when are you going to get your period? I'm like, I don't know, like 2 weeks or something like that. So 2 weeks later, I go back to the doctor, and I am ready to put in a girl and a boy and finally, get pregnant for real. And I say to the doctor when I walk in, hey, before we start the appointment, can you just do a quick ultrasound and just see how my baseline, is doing? And he's like, okay, you're weird. So he gives me the ultrasound, but I actually knew why I was asking him to give me an ultrasound, because I had already taken a pregnancy test and I was naturally pregnant. And he gives me that ultrasound and he starts crying. He's like, oh my God, what is this? And I said, yeah, exactly.
And you don't know at this point the sex?
I have no idea the sex. I am monitored very closely. He, being a fertility doctor and not an obstetrician, is super cautious. So I have like a slightly low progesterone level, and he immediately supplements and gives me some medicine to take. And, I'm at this point, I'm like, I don't even know what to think. The one thing I do say to my husband is, even if this pregnancy ends in an early miscarriage or it ends up being a boy, I will always have the reassurance that my body did get naturally pregnant again after all of that horrible devastation. We ended up being, pregnancy continues to kind of move along nicely. And at 11 or 12, I think it was 11 weeks, I did the blood test again. And I was traveling for work, and I got a call from my nurse, from my regular obstetrician, and she's crying. And she says, Ellen, it's a healthy girl. And I mean, it was, after so much, the most unbelievable news I can ever imagine. And then I lived in absolute fear, as any woman who's had a miscarriage will attest, for the entire rest of my pregnancy, that something wouldn't go right. And I was lucky, I would tell you this, I was lucky to have gestational diabetes in that pregnancy, because I had to then get monitored twice a week at the end. And as someone who had a stillborn, I was thrilled to be monitored so closely. And my 8-pound, 2-ounce baby daughter was born on June 7th, a day after her due date, and totally healthy, totally fine. The why not now of writing the book is not just let's celebrate this story. It's let's remember all of the doctors who said to me along the way that I had crazy fertility issues, and show them this perfectly healthy baby girl after the years and years and years of IVF not working. Came into the world in the usual way, to quote Kat Stevens. I mean, totally healthy, normal, natural pregnancy. So that's a pretty interesting tale and a pretty important, I would say, story for a lot of women that are in their 30s. And I don't mean to say that I've solved some big problem. What I mean is to say is that I think I've cracked a little bit of the or I should say, I think I've proven in my own case that we just don't know a lot about the female reproductive system, and that we should stop, really hurting women when we just don't know.
Your story is unbelievable. And even as someone who knows it, I'm like sitting here in tears, recounting it and going through, the steps is just 6 IVF treatments by the age of 36 and everything prior to that. And just there's so many takeaways from this. And I'm so glad you're writing the book. And I remember us talking about you writing the book, but when you're on the other side of this, which thank goodness you're on this side now. One of the things that I think is really frustrating is that if someone were to go on right now and just start Googling and researching, you could find an article from the New York Times, from NPR, from The Atlantic, and all these medical legit sources that say different things, studies that have been done, and they suggest certain time periods, and then the next one will be completely different. So it's mind-boggling that here it is 2018, and we're so innovative on so many fronts, yet this is a bit of a mystery still. And I think sometimes the physicians kind of try to pretend like it's not an issue because they don't know. And that's just frustrating because your story was so complicated, yet it ended up being so simple. And then you were within the kind of prime age, right?
Yeah.
And
I had my daughter about 2 weeks after I turned 37.
Right. So, and you had started when you were 33. So it's not like you were outside of that gap. And an article that you actually had sent me that really resonated was from the New York Times. And it talks about when women have their first child between the age of 25 and 35, their pay never recovers. It talks about, the pay gap and the window of that 10-year kind of window of when women are supposedly the most fertile. I look at, how advanced we are with people getting married at later ages and technology and innovation, yet evolution doesn't necessarily mean it's advancing as quickly. And at the same time, there are these disconnects, of a lot of women are trying to decide, you're at the prime of your career, usually around 35-ish, and you are hitting your stride. Should I wait to have kids until after that? Should I not? And so I think a lot of women are making decisions to hold off and have kids later. And in my case, I'll be 39 in a few months, and I've had 2 miscarriages. I just kind of look back at the last couple of years, last even 5 years. So many people told me, you've got time. You've got time, whether it's, people that maybe I shouldn't have been listening to. And I've done my own research, of course. But I think there's a false narrative that, no, you've got time, which we don't know that. And I'm not suggesting I don't. I know the numbers and what is out there. And this is a danger zone for sure. But there's a sense of people just wanting to reassure you, hey, you've got plenty of time. Janet Jackson just had kids at age 50. And it's like, I don't know that that's necessarily that helpful, And then doctors tell me 2 different things oftentimes.
Well, my 2 learnings that I feel very passionate about, sharing is well, one is not so much of a learning. One is that, look, right now, the fertility industry is essentially a cash business because insurance doesn't generally pay for it. So when you're going in as a very vulnerable person, because you, especially and I think men feel a lot of this vulnerability, absolutely, because and by the way, a lot of infertility is male factor, a lot, and it's not studied anywhere. I mean, female fertility is not studied, and male is certainly not studied, but a lot of it is male factor. But women go in very, very vulnerable, feeling like my body is literally built to do this, and I can't do it, right? So that's a pretty core vulnerability. And then you go into a doctor that is essentially only getting paid more if you don't succeed. And just as a basic capitalist observation, that's not a great setup for women, right? Because as you get increasingly more vulnerable, as I can personally attest, 6 IVF cycles paid out of pocket later, as you get more personally vulnerable, you're willing to spend more money. And you don't ever want to be the person who says, I didn't have a child because I wasn't willing to spend enough money and go into enough debt. Because of course you're willing to if you really want to have a child, right? So that's number one. And I think that is a major issue that has to be dealt with. Number two is that we don't study fertility across the board. So it's not like every woman, when she starts to go to a gynecologist, gets baseline fertility testing, and that goes into a big pool of data. And then we know, oh, this person at 21 was this, and at 25 was this, and at 32 it took them this long to get pregnant. We don't know any of that. All we know from a data perspective is on people who are going into fertility clinics and getting this testing. So probably people who are predisposed to have some sort of, issue getting pregnant. So that means the data is not very good. So here we are looking at we're women who are very, potentially women who are pretty analytical and driven are looking at pretty bad data to make decisions. The other thing I like to joke is that the numbers of miscarriages, if it's 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, those numbers are both, I don't know. I just don't know which the number is, right? It's probably 1 in 4. If that's how many pregnancies end in miscarriage, that's miscarriage, especially, is something that is absolutely devastating, but it doesn't kill you. Well, it can kill you, but it usually doesn't kill you, right? But it's a woman's thing. And, being a good feminist, I like to remind people that if 1 in 4 men was only born with 1 testicle, it wouldn't kill them, but it would be pretty personally devastating. And you know what? We would know why.
Well, there are plenty of opportunities to research this. Like you said, it's definitely, it's not like this is a rare situation. There's plenty.
No, the reality is it is beneficial to wait as a woman professionally, to wait until you have children. But the other side of that story that we also don't love to talk about is the reason for that is because we don't demand a family structure where fathers and partners are equally demanded on for childcare. The reason that article has to even be written is because the assumption is that women have to do so much more of the work in raising a child. So we can't make those statements about how it is better for women professionally to wait till 35 without saying the reason for that is because men are not held to the same standard when they're talking about having children. If a man was going in for a job and his wife was about to have a baby, it wouldn't factor 1 iota. But if a woman was going in for a job about to have a baby, it would be potentially game-changing.
Right. It's a complete disconnect. There's a huge clash here of these two things. And listening to your story and looking back and being really just mindful of each step of the way, most people probably wouldn't have pushed that hard for the research. And the fact that you had enough insight and knew yourself well enough to hand it to your mom to take the lead on at a certain point was so smart, because the handwritten letters and her being able to connect with someone who was willing to help and then get that case up to the Mayo Clinic, that's allowed you to better understand your entire situation, which will allow more people to as well. But it took years of you pressing and pushing. And one of my biggest takeaways for anyone, if they're struggling with a fertility challenge or not, or even thinking about having kids, is that ask your questions. And if you don't like the answers, or if you don't believe that you've found all of the facts, go somewhere else and ask more and keep asking more. I think that's the only thing we can do right now. You can educate yourself, but there is a lot of conflicting data out there.
Absolutely. And I know from, you and I being friends, and quite honestly, I know from a lot of my other friends like us that, and my own experience is the perfect illustration of this. There is a vast discrepancy in care when it comes to fertility treatments and support vast discrepancies. And you'll look at websites of fertility clinics and they advertise, what their numbers are. And maybe that's helpful. But the other side of it is, this is a case where you can't just go to the regular doctor that happens to be in your neighborhood. This is a situation where in many cases you need to keep looking and searching until you find a doctor who meets your needs. And I can tell you that my needs were, I needed to know a lot of information from my doctor. And I needed to be very in the loop on why I was taking certain drugs and why not. And my eventual successful doctor, putting me on a supplement regimen, gave me a lot of confidence because I felt like we're doing things that I can do every single day to improve my chances here. And so, I think knowing yourself and knowing how you want to approach this challenge in your life, and then finding the doctor that really does meet that is incredibly, incredibly important in this journey. To your point. I mean, of course, that's the same in any medical journey, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will have had other medical stories where it's your own grit and push and demands that finally get you the right answers. But this is certainly one of those.
Absolutely. I mean, having gone to doctors in different states myself, it's night and day of what they're even willing to do, because there was one doctor that said, no, I don't think you need those tests yet. I think you've got plenty of time. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a guess. That's a total guess. You could do this test and be sure, or you could just guess and bring me back in 6 months. I'm like, I don't know about this. This doesn't quite sound right because I am 38, almost 39. It's amazing. And then I look at the doctors in San Diego, and the one specifically I went to that you suggested from your clinic, your fertility clinic, and they're willing to do over and beyond and above what I even knew to ask for. So it is so important to do your own research, but also keep going to other physicians if you feel like it's just you're not making sense of what's going on.
And I also think the thesis of this conversation is both my own why not now of writing the book, but is the reminder to women and families and couples to ask yourself why not now when you're talking about having a family. And I think, it's one of the most important why not nows that we have to face as a group of professional women, as a culture, as a workforce. And I think, the reason I bring all those other things into it is because as much as it's a quote unquote personal decision, if you are someone who really values, and most people value their own careers. I'm not suggesting people don't, but if it's something that's important to you to stay working and to stay on your path, it is really important to be a little bit strategic, right? And that's why people like you and I are having this conversation, because we have tried to be strategic and when we have children. But the other side of it is it's also important to include in your strategy figuring out the baby thing, and it might take some work, just like your career has taken work. And I don't think that. Look, I think there needs to be so much more science before we go around telling women when they should try to have children and not, and just looking at a woman, like me who was in my mid 30s or like you at 39, just the blanket statement is, oh, you should have tried earlier is completely ignorant and unfair, because we don't know. And so until there's actual hard data that says you really should try before X age, you can't go around telling women that they should have known, right? And because of that, I think it's incredibly important for us to say why not now and know the answer, and then when it is now, when now comes, be able to say, look, I'm gonna think of this as an additional part of my real energy and focus, and give it as much time as I give my career in many ways. Because I think for those of us for whom there needs to be additional work aside the obvious to have a baby, taking it on as though it's part of your career it's that you need that much. I can't say everyone needs that, but many of us need that much dedication to really make it happen.
Right. Oh, that's so well said. And I think that that question, life changes and shifts and moves, and sometimes it takes a lot longer than we think. And so even though you might say, why not now? And yes, we want to start a family right now. You have no idea what that looks like, obviously. But sometimes I don't think we really take that into account too much. So the book, do you have a timeline at all? Or I'm sure listeners are wanting to know more and be able to keep an eye out for it.
Well, I don't have a timeline yet. I'm working through that, figuring out who's going to publish it. What I'm hoping, and this is the sort of teaser, not just the book teaser, but the real teaser, is that later this summer, summer of 2018, I'm going to be implanting that boy and girl embryos that I had been planning to implant this time around before my daughter and nature got in the way, happily got in the way. And so I am hoping that by the spring, summer of 2019, I will have actually even more information to share in my story, because I will have had either one or two of those babies. And the real, the real sort of opportunity is if the male of that pair ends up taking, and then I can fully prove that the IPEX syndrome was the cause of male fetal death, and that this male baby was born totally healthy and fine. And so what I'm hoping is that as I work on writing, that maybe the pub date can be, by the time it'll be out with me knowing whether or not some of those embryos have taken, or else I'll just have to update people in other ways.
Well, and where can people follow you in the interim?
I am at Ellen Gustafson on Twitter, which is where I put most of this stuff. And the tentative title for the book is very appropriately Trying.
Oh, I love that. And your last name, Gustafson. There you go. Good. Just in case somebody didn't quite nail that the first time. Ellen, thank you so much for sharing your story, for educating us. This is just such an awesome conversation, and being able to learn, and your grit, to keep going. And props to your mom too. It's just an incredible story. And I thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for sharing your story, Amy. And we're all rooting for you in this particular Why Not Now journey.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?